What's up everyone, and welcome to episode 20 of my State of Xbox series. For this episode, we're looking at the creators of the first-person shooter, id Software. Let's find out if their game's going exclusive spells doom for the PS5. id Software was founded in 1991 by programmers John Carmack and John Romero, game designer Tom Hall, and artist Adrian Carmack. A few months earlier, Carmack programmed a way to side-scroll graphics on a PC using Super Mario Bros. 3 as proof. A larger prototype was then sent to Nintendo, who were impressed, but rejected collaboration as they wanted their IP exclusively on Nintendo hardware. Fortunately, at around the same time, Apogee Software founder Scott Miller contacted Romero to collaborate as he knew the group possessed exceptional talent. This led to Commander Keen and Invasion of the Vorticons, a side-scrolling game that incorporated code programmed for the Mario demonstration. The game was immediately successful, and so with their first paycheck, they started id Software. Over the next year, id worked on many projects including Commander Keen sequels, but by late 1991, Carmack's interests had shifted from 2D to 3D, which led to id developing a 3D remake of 1981's Castle Wolfenstein. Unlike other games at the time, Wolfenstein 3D was fast and violent. This helped it achieve critical and commercial success when it released in mid-1992, and is why it's credited with establishing the FPS genre despite not being the first implementation.
This is the first-person shooter, definition here. The gun, the key controls that I had set up for Wolfenstein were the first FPS key controls. And the sound, and the violence, and the speed. All of those things were just, back then, those were huge. Every one of those things was a huge increase in entertainment back then on a PC.
It followed up Wolfenstein 3D with 1993's Doom, which would be their first of many games plagued by a troublesome development that splintered the company. For Doom, this affected co-founder Tom Hall. He created a design doc called the Doom Bible, which fleshed out the lore, but his contributions were dismissed by Carmack, who wanted as little story as possible to focus on technical innovations. Being the chief programmer, Carmack was the more important of the two, and so he got his own way. Hall, feeling slighted, then began spending less time at work and was eventually fired. And unfortunately for him, going with Carmack's vision was the right call, as Doom is considered one of the most significant games in history. Whereas Wolfenstein 3D established the modern FPS, Doom popularized it with approximately 20 million players within 2 years of release. It also established industry-standard modes like online multiplayer and even birthed the term deathmatch. To capitalize on this monumental success, id released Doom 2 exactly 10 months later in October 1994. The sequel was again light on story, but featured larger levels and new weapons and enemies. It was also the first id game to be sold in stores, where 600,000 copies were sold within a month. Doom was a phenomenon, but id would not ride this high with their next series.
Doom 2 is just such a bigger, badder, better version of Doom. A lot of people out there waiting for it, for sure. This is pretty much more popular than football.
Once you start playing, you're hooked.
We have a lot of people asking what to expect in Doom 2, when's it going to come out, where is it going to be, where can they buy the game.
We knew it was going to be a monster hit. When the people from GT Interactive Software sat us down and gave us a clue as to what kind of numbers Doom 2 was doing in pre-orders, we all hit the floor.
Id's next game was 1996's Quake, which was their first game with full real-time 3D rendering. Like Doom, Quake received critical acclaim, but this success was overshadowed by a development period so troubled that the majority of the team quit after launch. The biggest departure was co-founder John Romero, who imagined Quake as a full 3D world with third-person melee combat. Other leadership considered this risky, and because the project was taking so long, it was used as the reason to drop his design choices. Romero quit because of this, and was eventually able to make the Quake he envisioned with Daikatana in 2000, which despite also having a shaky development, was still more fun for Romero due to the lack of creative interference. Finally, whilst Quake does share Doom's critical acclaim, its sales were not as close to Doom 2. A disappointment shared with their next game, 1997's Quake 2, which itself is a sequel in name only. This was because the remaining staff did not care for Romero's gothic, Lovecraftian horror themes, and so replaced it with a sci-fi aesthetic that shared no continuity. Quake 2 also saw another notable firing with level designer American McGee. Allegedly, his colleague Tim Willits deliberately gave him bad advice on level design, which he presented to Carmack. This angered him so much that he fired McGee soon after. Despite the continued drama, it still went back to Quake for 1999's Quake 3 Arena. However, this time, a story-based single-player mode was excluded to focus on multiplayer, a design decision credited as the reason why there were no significant issues during development. In fact, it's Carmack's favourite game he's worked on. Quake 3 sales would still be fewer than Doom 2 though, so after 3 attempts, it was time to revisit Hell.
The original founding kind of corporate structure of id Software really led to a bunch of problems. We're all equal partners, and then I see, somebody that's not working as hard, and I can't say I was the most mature about that. I was, 20 something years old, and it did bother me when I'm like, everybody, okay, we need to all pull together, and we've done it before. Everybody, we know we can do this if we get together and we grind it all out, and left at that point where it was, all right, either everybody has to be contributing like up to this level or they need to get pushed out was not, that was not a great situation. And I look back on it and no, we pushed people out of the company that could have contributed if there was a different framework for them.
So if you think the framework was different, some of the human tension could have been a little bit
alleviated. It almost certainly would have.
Doom 3 came out in 2004 and once again suffered from a turbulent development. In June 2000, John Carmack internally announced a remake of Doom that would utilize next-generation technology. However, other id leadership, including the only other remaining co-founder Adrian Carmack, believed they were going back to the same formulas and properties too often and opposed this. Unfortunately for them, after the positive reception for Return to Castle Wolfenstein, which was itself a remake utilizing next-gen tech, most employees sided with John Carmack and presented id leadership with an ultimatum. Let them remake Doom or fire them. They chose the former. Doom 3 would be more story-focused than previous titles, but would still utilize new technologies like 480p widescreen resolution and 5.1 surround sound. And once again, Carmack's vision proved correct as Doom 3 released to an 87 on Metacritic and sold 3.5 million copies in 2 years, making it id's most successful game. Post Doom 3, id spent the next half-decade releasing mobile games like Doom RPG to no fanfare, and an updated version of Quake 3 Arena called Quake Live. It wouldn't be until 2011 before id released their next AAA game, Rage. This open-world post-apocalyptic FPS was initially going to be published by EA. However, when ZeniMax Media acquired id in June 2009, they also took over publishing. According to director Tim Willits, these events didn't affect development, so we can confidently say Rage was always going to end up with a 79 on Metacritic that was praised for its graphics and combat, but criticized for its story and performance. It was also Carmack's last game before he moved to Oculus VR.
The last big game that I worked on at id, which was Rage, we spent 6 years on that game. And we went into that. It was using flashy new technology, which there's some other life lessons about that. But we had an E3 where we were game of show at E3, but we kept on, it didn't quite ship. And by the time it got out, the world had changed around us. The technology decisions that were made for some earlier systems weren't necessarily the right thing for the very latest ones. We now had Call of Duty and Battlefield coming out as these juggernauts that we were competing with. And I look back as one of those real decisions. I think we should have done whatever it would have taken to ship that 2 years earlier, be less ambitious with some of the technologies, and get it out earlier.
Its next game was Doom 2006, and you guessed it. There were problems during development. Carmack actually hinted Doom 4 was in development back in 2007, but we'd wait 6 years for a proper update. In April 2013, Kotaku published an expose which stated Doom 4 was trapped in development hell and was completely restarted in 2011. This pre-2011 version was a scripted and cinematic uprising of Hell on Earth with heavy comparisons to Call of Duty campaigns. id would later validate this article, with director Marty Stratton referring to this version of Doom 4 as a mess with a lack of personality. Fortunately, going back to the drawing board led to a string of great decisions, like renaming Doom 4 to Doom, a fitting name as the game would take more inspiration from 90s shooters than its contemporaries. For example, id forwent cinematic set pieces and story to put the focus on the movement and fast shooting. These design decisions led to an 85 on Metacritic, and within 3 months, 1 million copies sold on the PC alone. It would also only be a year to get more Doom with Doom VFR, a VR experience where the player's consciousness is uploaded to an artificial network and is tasked with restoring facility operations. It only scored a 69 on Metacritic, but disappointment was short-lived as a true sequel was announced months later.
The only thing they fear is you.
Doom Eternal's new features included a grapple hook and traversal sections. They also built the multiplayer themselves, as opposed to 2016's outsourcing, to make it more cohesive with the campaign. Doom Eternal released in March 2020 to an 88 on Metacritic and sold 3 million digital copies in the first month, making it id's most successful game of all time. However, once again, Doom Eternal would not go through development without controversy. In May 2020, executive producer Marty Stratton posted on Reddit to claim the game's composer, Mick was given extensive time to compose and mix audio tracks, but failed to do so. Id's audio director Chad Mossholder then stepped in to complete the project, but did so with audio that was noticeably heavily compressed. In November 2022, Gordon released his own account surrounding the in-game score in OST. Most importantly, he came with receipts that disproved many claims in Stratton's Reddit post. Bethesda has since publicly come out in support of Stratton, but as this was less than a week ago at the time of recording, I can't tell you how this ends, though I personally find it hard to believe Bethesda and Stratton come out looking good considering Gordon's receipts. Finally, the last game id has released is Quake Champions, an arena shooter that got its 1.0 release in August 2022. It's been well received by Quake fans, but has failed to maintain player retention compared to other free-to-play games.
Well, Machine Games rocks. So Machine Games has nailed Wolfenstein. That's not even a problem, you know. And I think that the internal id studio has nailed Doom. And you know, people were worried before 2016 came out, and it did come out, and people were blown away, thought it was amazing. And then when the trailer for Eternal came out, it was like, they didn't mess it up, you know. Like they just made it the way that Doom 2 was better than the original, because of the double barrel, they did that. But then with the new video that they put out with the story, so much more story than I ever would have thought was going to be in it. It looks just awesome. I can't wait.
Do you love following it? Do you still feel emotionally attached, or you just okay?
Yeah, and it's funny because I talked to the people that id. Like I run into them at shows, and the lead designer and all that. Like today, I ran into more id guys. And they're like, yeah, we're working on Doom and everything, and so it's like, you guys are taking it forward. Do a good job, keep going, you know. People can just take it on into the future and just keep doing a kick-ass job.
So, what future projects do we have to look forward to? Unfortunately, all we have is Stratton's confirmation that a new game is in development, and according to rumors, it's a new Quake with both single-player and multiplayer. Whatever it is, id have proven that despite their inability to develop a game without controversy, the very high quality of the end product is also just as assured. And with future titles almost certainly being Xbox exclusive, losing id's industry-defining first-person shooters is a huge blow to PlayStation, who have no first-party equivalents to make up for that loss. It just might be a while before we even get the game's name to parade in front of Sony.
Every project for the last couple ones we had been considering, well, is it time to remake Doom with new technology and all that? At the end of Quake 3, we did have a little bit of an internal spat over where we were going with the next project. The only kind of foregone conclusion was that it was going to be single-player focused because there was a good contingent in the company that wasn't happy with the Quake 3 kind of activity level of gameplay.
We wanted to really create this scary, intense, action-packed horror game. And everybody is much more afraid when they're alone.
But there was still debate over exactly what we were going to do. And it did come down to a point where, we had a big forced issue about it where I wasn't at all comfortable with the alternate project that was being pushed on there. And it wasn't clear that we could come up with a clear, unified company direction on something brand new. And every project, but the last couple ones we had been considering, well, is it time to remake Doom with new technology?
John, when he was doing research on what the next generation of technology for MID was going to be, came to the conclusion that he was going to be able to realize sort of the vision that he had in his mind's eye when he came up with the original idea for Doom, in that we could use and leverage that technology to really create this intense action horror game and make a really scary version of Doom.
Originally, I was opposed to the idea. I was a bit concerned that the team that we had, which was a bit in transition, wasn't going to be able to really push Doom in a direction to sort of live up to the title.
So I just kind of made that the stand and said, now's the time. We can do some really radically better stuff with new technology now.
In hindsight, my opposition was absolutely wrong. The decision was great.